Then your final step is run the formula. So we're going to practice this. So now that you have those key numbers, you're going to run this formula that I'm showing you right now. It's after repair value multiplied by 0.75. And you might say, well, what does that mean? What does the 0.75 mean? Well, you want 10% profit at least for yourself. If you sell the house for $300,000, you're going to want at least $30,000 for yourself, right? And then the other 15% is the selling costs and the money costs. So for example, you got to pay a realtor 3%, the other realtor 3%. So the buyer's agent 3%, seller's agent 3%. You got to pay a title company. You got to pay, and then usually hard money lenders. From my experience, doesn't always work out this way, but if you get it done in about 4 to 6 months, the hard money and private money to do a deal shouldn't cost you more than about 5% of the after repair value.
Welcome to Real Estate to Freedom, the podcast that helps you create the active life you've always wanted through passive income investments. Now, here are your hosts, Dr. Nate and Becky Lambert.
So let's start with the story of Rafael. He was really interested in the mentoring, but he ultimately wasn't willing to pull the trigger and invest in himself. And I felt really bad when a couple weeks later he messaged me about a deal he'd purchased. He had miscalculated his numbers and he was about to lose $25,000 and wondered if there was any way out of it. And I'm like, oh, no, there's no way out of it, right? Real estate can be so profitable, but if you don't know what you don't know, it can be very, very bad, right? So you either, I always like to say, you got to pay one way or another. You either pay up front to learn and get educated and build great connections, or you pay the school of hard knocks. And unfortunately, for many people, they can't withstand more than one of these kinds of losses, and they just drop out and they never see all the amazing things about real estate. So, so that's what happened to Rafael. I felt bad that he had to get educated that way, but sometimes that's the only way that you can do it if you're not willing to invest in yourself. And again, he never did recover from it. I just know he just went back to his W-2 job, and that's what he's doing. So after you find a deal, you must know how to determine whether it will get you a favorable return on your investment, right? So that's so important, right? You must do the analysis up front. Either do the analysis up front or stand to lose a lot of money, right? That's why tonight's lesson is so important. So I'm glad you guys for sticking with it till the end. This might be the most important lesson for you. So in fact, we're gonna do some practicing. And the more you can practice, the better, right? So here's 3 steps to analyzing a fix and flip. Okay, I know we're focused on rentals. I'll show you the rental analysis as well, but this is how to do it with the flip. First of all, you got to determine the after repair value. So what is the after repair value? You look up the properties that are fixed up and they're in the condition that you want to sell your flip, right? So again, that's called the after repair value. You look at what has sold ideally in the last 3 to 6 months, what sold in the proximal area, and ideally you want to look at something within about a half a mile to 1 mile radius. It's got to be pretty close to the subject property. And if it's possible, you want to find homes that are plus or minus 10% of the size of the property, right? So, for example, if you're looking at something that's 3,000 square feet, ideally you want to look between 2,700 square feet and 3,300 square feet. Now you can give or take a little bit, right? But ideally, the closer you can get to the size and to the bedroom count, the better. So And again, do something fairly recently. The more recent, the better. And again, a lot of people are like, well, I'm just gonna look at what's out there that's up for sale. So the problem with that, guys, is that who knows? Some people just put a pie in the sky number out there. They're hoping to get it. Maybe they're not motivated, or they're ignorant, or they're just trying to play the market and see if they can get their price. You don't want to include those in your analysis, right? So you only want to look at ones that have actually sold, because that's going to give you an idea of what the property could actually sell for. If your house that you're looking at to purchase that you've analyzed is 4 bedrooms, you don't want to look at other houses that are 6 bedrooms or 2 bedrooms. At the most, maybe 3 to 5, okay, plus or minus a bedroom and bath. It's kind of your rule of thumb. And you got to look at what are some of the intangibles, right? Like if it's right next to the freeway and you're hearing the noise of all the cars all the time, I mean, you got to deduct for things like that. And you want to ask a realtor, how much would I take into account, right? So I mean, I always tell people like get a professional to help you figure this out, because especially when you're just getting started, it's really important to have a professional look at this. Okay, so if you're going to buy a property, you want to make sure. Now, you don't have to have all these ducks in a row when you get a property under contract. Sometimes it's just good to make an offer and see what you can get to go. But before you actually come through and purchase it, I would say at least 1, maybe 2 is even better. Realtors giving you their opinions, people that know the area, know the market, know what things are selling for. Because sometimes even like across a major road is a big divider, right? You've heard of people saying the other side of the tracks, right? And that can be a real thing. So you want to make sure that you're only looking at things that are right on the right side of the tracks, if you will. And there's certain software. Don't use Zillow. That's not a good estimate. Sometimes in some states, Redfin.com can be a good tool, only if they show sold comps. Like here in Utah, Redfin used to be awesome, but then they became a lender in Utah, and so they weren't able to disclose sold comparables anymore. So that doesn't work for me. That's why sometimes you just need to get a realtor involved to really determine what the value is. But at least some of these other Redfin type of sites can give you a good starting place. Unless they're a lender, and then it's not really any better than Zillow. But I mean, it's not a terrible place to at least get some ballpark idea, right? So that's your first step. You gotta figure out what is that after repair value. What's it going to be worth afterwards? Okay. Now, second step, you got to determine the costs. How much is it going to cost to fix this up? So there's software that that software that Ed showed you guys last week. That's a great way, a great place to go to get. You can get some real-time estimates of costs on sites like that using our software, because they can even connect. Our software that Edmund showed you even connects with local hardware stores, so like Home Depot, so you can get an idea of what the approximate costs might be for the exact materials. So that gets you started. I wouldn't end there. Now you don't want to bring a contractor to every property that you're looking at maybe buying, because contractors are busy and you don't want to burn relationships. But what I sometimes would do is, if I'm doing a property inspection, I'll maybe take a video of the property, send it to my contractor, and say, hey, I'm not necessarily looking for you to give me a perfectly solid bid right now, not seeing this, but can you give me at least a ballpark range of what it might cost to fix this up? And a contractor spending 5 minutes looking at your video and giving a ballpark isn't much skin off his back, right? But if he's driving it half an hour and looking at it for half an hour and driving back, I mean and then you're like, oh, I didn't buy it, and he's like, what? So a video like that can be a great way And then once you get, if you're like, okay, I'm just going to make an offer. And by the way, I have a whole module about what's called ready, fire, aim. But tonight, I'll just give you a brief summary. Ready, fire, aim is where you just do your basic analysis that we're showing you right now, this lightning analysis. And then you just make an offer based on what you think it looks like and get it under contract. So under contract means that the person has agreed to sell it to you, and that's what under contract means. So if you get it under contract and you can say, hey, I want 2 weeks due diligence or 3 weeks due diligence, and my earnest money isn't gonna go hard until then. You can put that in the contract, right? So really there's no risk. You don't even lose anything by getting something under contract. And then the nice thing is if you bring your contractor in to the property and the contractor's like, oh man, now that I'm seeing this property, it needs a lot more work. I said 40,000, but now that I'm seeing this, and this, it's going to be more like 60,000. And you're like, oh crap, I already have it under contract. Well, good news. You could just go back to the seller and say, hey, unfortunately, my contractor came over and he found X, Y, and Z. This is a big problem. Like, I can't buy this anymore. Although, if you can give me a $20,000 discount, yeah, I could still do it. So you just write what's called an addendum, and an addendum can get you can go ahead and snag the property, right? Because the addendum will say, you got to reduce the price by 20,000. If the seller's motivated, he or she will go for it, right? If they're not really motivated, then you just walk away. And the good thing is you didn't lose anything except some time, and that was a good learning experience. So you didn't lose anything, right? So you have nothing to lose by doing the ready, fire, aim. And they call it ready, fire, aim because you're doing the lightning analysis that I'm showing you. Then you're firing, right? You're getting it under contract. You're getting them to sign under the dotted line, which locks it up for you. No one else can come and buy that property legally if you've got it under contract. And then you aim. In other words, then you do your more detailed analysis. If you're on our elite investor team, you can bring it to the deal room. We can talk about it. And then, you can back out or adjust the contract if you needed to. So that's kind of what I'm talking about here. Then your final step is run the formula. So we're going to practice this. So now that you have those key numbers, you're going to run this formula that I'm showing you right now. It's after repair value multiplied by 0.75. And you might say, well, what does that mean? What does the 0.75 mean? Well, you want 10% profit at least for yourself. If you sell the house for 300,000, you're going to want at least 30,000 for yourself, right? And then the other 15% is the selling costs and the money costs. So for example, you got to pay a realtor 3%, the other realtor 3%. So the buyer's agent 3%, seller's agent 3%. You got to pay a title company. You got to pay, and then usually hard money lenders. From my experience, doesn't always work out this way, but if you get it done in about 4 to 6 months, the hard money and private money to do a deal shouldn't cost you more than about 5% of the after repair value. That's why I like this, ARV, after repair value, multiply it by 0.75 minus repair costs. Okay. Because then you got to take into account the $60,000 that you got to pay to fix it up. And, like I mentioned, you don't have to have everything dialed in perfectly when you're doing this lightning analysis, but you need to at least have a rough estimate to submit an initial offer. Okay. That's why we practice this a lot on the deal room every week, because I want everyone on my team, on my investor team, to be super fluent and good at running this, because it's so important. Okay, so let's practice. Remember the formula is ARV multiply by 0.75 minus repairs. So it's a pretty simple formula. Let's practice. Let's say I go and find this house. I think it could sell for 200,000. So ARV equals 200,000. That's what I got. 2 realtors to take a look. They say, I think it could sell for 200,000. Then I go to get my contractor, send him a video. They say, hey, I think this, you could fix this up for between 20 and 40,000. So let's just go with 30,000, okay? Repairs are 30,000. So remember the formula, ARV multiplied by 0.75 minus the repairs. What is your maximum allowable offer? That's your maximum allowable offer, MAO. That's the most you can offer and still get a nice 10% profit for yourself. You could even offer 115,000 and then maybe you go up. That gives you a little wiggle room, right? And by the way, here's a pro tip. If they are not willing to do it for 120,000, well, good news is that you could even get it under contract. We talked about the getting your ready, fire, aim strategy dialed in. So, good news is if they won't take 120,000, they're like, oh, 140 is the lowest I could do. You really just can't pull them down any further. It's okay. You could still get that under contract. And here's why that would benefit you. Well, they can go in and get it under contract for a little bit higher. They know they got to work the person down, but they just go ahead and get it under contract. That person starts thinking about their trip to the Bahamas they're going to take. They're wanting to get out of the situation. They're counting their money. You get an inspection report that has like 30 things wrong with the property. You send it over to them and say, oh man, this property's a lot worse than I thought. I need you to drop the price to 120,000 or fix all these things up. Then magically a lot of times they'll be willing to go down to your maximum allowable offer. So that's why I tell people, hey, do the best you can to get them to that maximum allowable offer. If it doesn't work, just go ahead and get it under contract for a little bit more, knowing that you're going to walk away if you can't get them to go down a little bit further. But getting an inspector to come out, it's usually only $300 to $400, and that can really move the needle when they see 30 pages with photos of all the problems that their property has. Because then you're like, hey, you think I'm seeing this? What is everyone else going to see? What are they going to think? Right? So then they're like, all right, I'll go ahead and I'll sell it to you for 120. All right, let's do this. They're like, at least I'll have a little bit of money to spend. And they'll be like, yeah, they're right. Someone else would see this after all. So that's a little nice tip that could make you an extra 20 or 30,000. I've helped a lot of my elite investor team, like Luke Atticus. He did this and it was awesome for him. Okay, so 5 steps. Let's talk about rentals now. It's important to consider the type of the property and the property condition. So again, when you're doing the comparables, make sure you're comparing apples to apples. So a rental doesn't need to be as pristine as a flip. So, when you're flipping a house, you got to probably put ideally really make the kitchen and master bedroom look really nice and the master bath. With the rental, you can kind of cheap out a little bit. So with your, rehab budget, you can go a little lighter. And then you got to factor the monthly payment. So to calculate the monthly payment, you go to like an app like mortgagecalculator.org and you get the principal and interest payments. So you can say, all right, this is going to buy this for 400,000. The principal interest based on if I got like a 30-year loan at 7% interest or whatever today's current rate is. You can look up the tax data on a site like Redfin, or you can use your county tax assessor's website. So that's public information. They don't hide what the taxes are. So you could find that out, divide it by 12. There you go. Add a little bit for the insurance, the insurance costs in your area. And then you get what's called the PITI, which stands for principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Then the next step is to determine, so you get your full, what would your likely payment be? And then you determine the average gross rent. And there's a great website that I love called rentometer.com. It's a great way to look at comparables. You can also look at Facebook Marketplace. What are people advertising? I mean, it's good to look at both, right? I mean, because again, like this, if they're advertising a rent, that doesn't mean they're actually going to get it. So it might be a little higher than what you could actually get. Rentometer has what people are actually paying, so that's pretty awesome. So you put in the numbers on Rentometer, number of beds, put in the address. By the way, if it's in a more rural area, it's going to be really hard, but usually if there's a lot of houses around, you should be fine. The other thing to consider is you can ask a property management company, and that's probably like the most exact way to find out, right? Ask a property manager, and they're wanting your business, so they'll be like, oh yeah, I'll look at it. Like I'm happy to give you an idea. Again, they might be pushing it a little bit high because they want your business, so you got to keep in that as a possibility. But the more data points you can get, the better, because this is a very important part of your decision process, right? And then finally, you determine your expenses, and this is kind of the way I like to show people to do that. So you have management costs, so 10% of gross rent. That's there's property managers that charge 6 or 8% even, but I just like to put in 10%, estimate a little bit high, and then you got to factor in that a lot of times there's going to be a vacancy, so you factor in a 10% gross rents for vacancy, and then finally the repairs and maintenance. There's always going to be things breaking down. You got to do tune-ups and all that kind of stuff. So you want to set aside 10% for repairs and maintenance. And again, it's better to be conservative in your estimates, because it's much better to make a little more than less, right? You'd much rather be pleasantly surprised. Like that's why, that's been the philosophy of me and my investing partners. It's like, hey, would rather under promise and over deliver than the reverse, right? So again, a minimum of 30% of gross rents is kind of like it's kind of the number you're going to plug in. You're never going to obviously know, right? Anything can happen. Could be a lot. It could be more, or it could be less. But this at least gives you a ballpark idea of what kind of expenses to anticipate. So then you determine the gross cash flow. And here is the formula, guys. I'm all about my formulas. So you take your gross rents and then minus estimated expenses minus your PITI, principal, interest, taxes, insurance. So that's going to give you your number that you're looking for. That'll give you your cash flow number. If you're in an appreciating market, it's okay. It's likely okay if your cash flow is a few $100s. So sometimes you can't get it perfect, but you want, if like usually the coastal areas are appreciating. The Midwest, unfortunately, is not typically appreciating. Sometimes the Southeast can be, but not always. So figure out if you're in an appreciating market. If you're not, then you probably don't want just a $200 cash flow. If you have a good chance for some upside, you don't want to be cash flow negative, but you don't want to bank on that. But if you're in an appreciating market and you have at least some cash flow, I'd say I'd probably go for it. So like I say, otherwise you're going to go for a higher gross cash flow in the Midwest, for example, or the Rust Belt. So this formula is a proxy for some initial analysis to determine if additional research is worth your time. Okay. For example, you don't want to just be doing hardcore analysis on every property unless you actually have it under contract. You're wasting your time, right? That takes a lot of time to run all this analysis. So you want to make sure that you're being smart with your time. Do this quick formula and then get it under contract, and then all you have nothing to lose and everything to gain, especially learning to gain. Even if you're like, you know what, Mr. Seller, I'm sorry, but upon further analysis, it's just not going to work out. Let's just say the gross rent on a house is $2,000. Let's keep the math super easy, $2,000. And then let's just say your PITI, which remember that stands for principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, kind of your monthly payment with the mortgage, right? You've all dealt with the PITI on your mortgage statement. Let's say PITI equals $1,400. All right, so run your numbers, run the formula, guys. And just to remind you, the 0.7 in this situation is maintenance, repairs, and vacancies. Maintenance, repairs, and vacancy. So would you guys do this deal? Would you do this deal? Say yes if you want to buy this. Say no. You don't want to break even, right? This one's a break even. I just threw out some numbers out of my head. I didn't realize what the actual outcome was going to be. But yeah, this one, if you didn't see, this is a no cash flow deal. It's not negative. Now here's the only way I would say to consider buying it. If you feel like, if based on the after repair value, let's say you have $50,000 of equity. Now you're going to lose some of that when you sell it, right? Because you got to pay selling costs, title fees, etc. But if there's a good chunk of equity and it's zero cash flow, maybe you'll be like, hey, you know what? I got this for such a good deal. It's got equity. I'm going to just hold on to it. And maybe again, if you're wanting to, you could just flip it, right? You could just flip it right away. Or if you're like, hey, I don't want to pay the tax man ordinary income, I want to switch this over to 15% capital gains tax. I'm going to hold on to it for a year, maybe, and just see, maybe it will cash flow better than I thought. I wouldn't do this unless there was equity, and not just, I'm not talking about like $10,000 of equity, because that's going to get drained out when you sell it, right? I'm talking about like enough to really make some money and make it worth your time. But if you do the analysis and have some equity, then yeah, why not? Why not buy it? If it's negative cash flow significantly more than you think the equity would bear up, you just got to do the analysis, right? If it's like negative 200 cash flow, but you have $50,000 in equity, and you're going to save a lot on, do the analysis, right? But if it's like $1,000 negative or something, and you're like, it's going to eat up all that cash flow, then you're better off to just buy it and flip it. So deal analysis skills, guys, are super vital for making money rather than losing money. You got to practice. You learn these skills. And again, guys, like the ready, fire, aim strategy is so awesome, because this quick and dirty lightning analysis, I think I coined that term when I wrote this book, Active Life, Passive Income. It's a great way to just figure something out, get a rough idea, then go make that offer, get it under contract. You're just going to learn as you do that. And then, come to the deal room. If you're on the elite investing team, we can go through it with you. Make sure you're thinking through everything. You can go reach out to the contractor, say, hey, I got this under contract. Can you come double check in person? Absolutely. You get a realtor, they'll be like, oh, and you'll be like, hey, if you're going to flip it, you can be like, hey, I'd love to use you on the back end. Can you give me some comparables on this property?
Thanks for listening to Real Estate to Freedom with Dr. Nate and Becky Lambert. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can download their free ebooks and workshops by visiting realestatetofreedom.com.